My name is Emily, and you're listening to Daily English Talk, a podcast where we practice real, calm, natural English together. The kind of English you actually hear and use in real life. And today we're going to talk about learning English for job interviews, about common interview questions, how to answer them naturally, and how to feel more confident when you're speaking about yourself, your experience, and your future in English. For many English learners, job interviews are one of the most stressful situations, not because they don't have skills or experience, but because they're afraid they won't be able to express themselves clearly. They worry about making mistakes, about not finding the right words, or about sounding less professional than they really are, and these fears are very normal, especially if English is not your first language. One important thing I want you to understand from the very beginning is that interview English is not about using very advanced or complicated language. It's about clarity, structure, and honesty. Interviewers are not looking for perfect grammar. They are looking for someone who can communicate ideas clearly, explain their experience, and show motivation. And you can absolutely do that with simple, natural English. Let's start with one of the most common interview questions. A question almost everyone hears at some point: can you tell me about yourself? And this question often makes people panic because it sounds very open, very big, like you need to talk about your whole life. But in reality, the interviewer is not asking for your personal story. They want a short, clear summary of who you are professionally, what you do, and what you're looking for next. A good, natural answer doesn't need to be long. You can start with something simple like, I'm currently working as, or I have experience in. Then mention one or two key skills or achievements and finish with what you're looking for. For example, right now, I'm looking for an opportunity where I can grow and use my skills. And that's already a strong answer, even though the language is simple. Notice how calm and structured that sounds. There's no rush. No pressure, just a clear flow of information, and that's something you can practice. You can practice this answer out loud again and again until it feels comfortable, because interviews become much easier when you don't have to think about every word, when some sentences are already familiar to you. Another very common question is, what are your strengths? And here many people feel uncomfortable, because talking about your strengths can feel like bragging. But in an interview, it's expected, and in English, you can talk about your strengths in a balanced, professional way. You can say something like, one of my strengths is that I'm very organized, or I'm good at working in a team, or I learn quickly and adapt easily. And then it's always a good idea to add a short example, even a very simple one like, in my last job, this helped me to. You don't need a long story, just one clear example is enough, because examples make your answers more real and more believable. And again, the language doesn't need to be complex. Interviewers appreciate clarity much more than fancy words. Now let's talk about a question that many people find difficult. What are your weaknesses? And this question is not a trap, even though it often feels like one. Interviewers don't expect you to say that you're perfect. They want to see self-awareness and honesty. So a good strategy is to mention a real but manageable weakness and then explain how you're working on it. For example, you can say, sometimes I can be too detail-oriented, or I used to feel nervous when speaking in meetings. And then add, but I'm working on improving this by, and this shows growth, responsibility, and a positive attitude, which are all very important in professional communication. As you listen to these examples, I want you to notice how often we use simple verbs like to be, to have, to work, to learn, to improve. These are very basic verbs, but they are extremely powerful in interviews because they are clear and direct. And when you're nervous, simple language is your best friend. Another question you might hear is, why do you want to work here? And this is where preparation really helps, because a good answer shows that you understand the company and that you're genuinely interested. But again, you don't need to say anything complicated. You can say, I like the company's values, or I'm interested in this role because it matches my skills, or I see opportunities to grow here, and even one or two honest reasons are enough. When you talk about your experience, you can use very natural structures like, I've worked in, I was responsible for, I helped to, I learned how to, and these phrases are extremely common in interview English. And once you feel comfortable with them, you'll notice that many questions start to feel similar because the language patterns repeat. It's also very common to be asked about your future. Questions like, where do you see yourself in a few years? And just like we talked about dreams and goals in the previous episode, you don't need a perfect plan. You can say something like, I'd like to continue developing my skills, or I see myself growing within the company, or I want to take on more responsibility over time. And these answers sound realistic and professional. One thing that often helps is slowing down your speech. Many learners try to speak fast because they're nervous, but speaking slowly actually makes you sound more confident. It gives you time to think, and it makes your English easier to understand, and interviewers appreciate that. If you don't understand a question during an interview, it's completely okay to ask for clarification. This is very important. You can say, could you please repeat the question? Or, could you explain that a bit more? And this does not look bad at all. In fact, it shows that you care about giving a correct answer. Let's also talk about confidence. Because confidence in interviews doesn't come from perfect English. It comes from preparation and self-respect. When you know your experience, when you've practiced your answers, and when you accept that small mistakes are normal, you naturally feel calmer, and your English sounds better because you're less stressed. I want you to remember that an interview is a conversation, not an exam. The interviewer wants to learn about you, and you are also learning about them. It's a two-way process, and when you see it that way, it becomes less scary and more balanced. As we continue this episode, we'll go deeper into more common interview questions, useful phrases, and ways to practice your answers naturally. But for now, just take a moment to breathe, listen, and let this English feel familiar. Because the more familiar it feels, the more confident you'll be when it really matters. As we continue talking about job interviews, I want you to slowly start feeling that this situation is not as intimidating as it might seem at first, because once you understand the patterns of interview questions, you begin to notice that many of them are actually asking for similar things. They just use different words. And when you recognize that, your mind can relax and your English can flow more naturally. Another very common question you might hear is, can you tell me about your previous work experience? And again, this is not an invitation to list every job you've ever had. It's an opportunity to highlight what is most relevant. You can choose one or two roles and briefly explain what you did there, what you learned, and how it connects to the position you're applying for now. And you can do all of this with very clear and simple language. For example, you might say, in my last position, I worked as a customer support specialist, where I communicated with clients and solved problems. And then add, this helped me develop strong communication skills. And that's already enough, because it shows experience, responsibility, and learning, all in just a few sentences. Sometimes interviewers ask behavioral questions. Questions like, can you describe a difficult situation at work and how you handled it? And these questions can feel challenging, especially in another language. But there's a very simple structure you can follow. You can describe the situation, explain what you did, and talk about the result. You don't need details, just the main idea. And this structure helps you stay calm and organized. You could say something like, there was a time when we had a tight deadline. Then continue with, I organized my tasks and communicated with my team. And finish with, we were able to finish the project on time. And this answer is clear, logical, and easy to follow, even though the language is very simple. Another question you might hear is, how do you handle stress or pressure? And this is a very realistic question because most jobs involve some level of stress. And here, honesty is important. You can say, I try to stay organized and focus on priorities. Or, I take short breaks to stay focused. Or, I communicate with my team when I need support. And these answers show emotional intelligence and responsibility. It's also very common to be asked, "Why should we hire you?" And this question can feel uncomfortable, but it's really just a chance to summarize your value. You don't need to compare yourself to others. You can simply say, "I have relevant experience. I'm motivated to learn, and I believe I would be a good fit for the team." And this sounds confident without being arrogant. When talking about skills, especially technical or professional skills, it's okay to keep things straightforward. You can say, "I have experience with," "I'm familiar with," or "I'm currently learning." And interviewers appreciate honesty. It's much better to say you're learning something than to pretend you already know everything. Sometimes interviews are conducted online, and that can add another layer of stress. But the same principles apply. Speak slowly, look at the camera when possible, and remember that small pauses are okay. Silence is not your enemy. It's just part of thinking. And native speakers pause too. One thing I really want to emphasize is the importance of practicing out loud, not just in your head, because speaking is a physical skill. Your mouth, your voice, your breathing all need practice. And even 5 or 10 minutes a day can make a big difference. You can record yourself, listen back, and notice that you probably sound better than you think. If you make a mistake during an interview, don't panic. Most mistakes are small and quickly forgotten. You can simply correct yourself and continue, for example, "I mean," or "Sorry, let me rephrase that." And this is very natural in English. Even native speakers do this all the time. Another helpful thing is preparing a few questions to ask the interviewer, because interviews usually end with, "Do you have any questions for us?" And saying no can sometimes sound like a lack of interest. So you can prepare simple questions like, "What does a typical day look like?" Or, "What opportunities for growth are there?" And these questions show curiosity and engagement. Talking about salary or expectations can also be part of the interview process. And this can feel uncomfortable, but you can keep it professional and calm. You can say, "I'm open to discussing this based on the responsibilities of the role," or "I'm looking for a fair offer that reflects my experience." And these are very common and respectful ways to approach the topic. As you prepare for interviews in English, try to remember that you are more than your language level. Your experience, your personality, your attitude all matter. And English is just the tool you're using to communicate those things, not a measure of your intelligence or value. I also want to say that rejection is part of the process. Even native speakers don't get every job they apply for, and if an interview doesn't go the way you hoped, it doesn't mean your English is bad or that you failed. It means you gained experience, and every interview makes the next one easier. Over time, you'll notice that certain phrases become very natural for you, answers come faster, your confidence grows, and what once felt scary becomes familiar. And that's a very powerful transformation, because it doesn't only affect interviews, it affects how you see yourself in professional situations. As we slowly come to the end of today's episode, I want you to take a moment and imagine yourself in your next interview, speaking calmly, clearly, and honestly, not perfectly, but confidently enough to be understood. And remember that this is a skill you can learn step by step. Thank you for spending this time with me and practicing English together. I hope this episode helps you feel more prepared and more confident when it comes to job interviews. And if you enjoy this kind of calm, practical English practice, please subscribe to Daily English Talk. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to keep creating episodes like this for you. So subscribe, keep practicing, and I'll see you in the next episode, where we'll continue improving your English for real life, one conversation at a time.